Thank you so much, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with you here today. My name is Iason Gabriel, and I'm a philosopher, an ethicist, and researcher at the AI company Google DeepMind. And today I will be talking about AI and human values, and I'm ready for my presentation. Thank you. So the question I want to ask is how can we live together well and continue to live together well in the age of advanced technologies, which include artificial intelligence? And following on from the wonderful talk from Merve, I think the starting point is to note that artificial intelligence, or the families of technologies that we gather under this label, are already having a profound effect on many people's lives. So this can be seen in the field of healthcare or mortgage lending, which I would say is the institutional level that Merve spoke so eloquently about. Moving forwards, people have noted that increasingly language models are being paired with tools so that AI systems can take actions in the world, and they think that that could be a consequential moment. And we also heard yesterday that people are already entering perceived relationships with artificial intelligence that they attribute various qualities to. There's stories about people falling in love with AI. And these are clearly consequential interfaces that we need to attend to very, very carefully as they have such a wide impact on many of our lives. And so, what I would suggest is that because of this wide and pervasive impact, the values that are embedded in these systems really matter. And I think we can see that just by referring to the technologies just discussed. So, it's very important that healthcare algorithms treat different cases fairly, and we may want to have a discussion about what that entails. If we think about artificial agents, it's very important that we understand whether they are following instructions or we set boundaries on what they can and cannot do. And so artificial intelligence is really a value-rich technology, I'd say, and one where there isn't a kind of natural default where we can just leave it alone. Actually, the decisions are coming to us quite quickly. And beyond that, I'd also like to stress a few further things. So, I think when a technology has a profound effect on people's lives, a lot of the other speakers have already said that there's no exit or we're being imposed upon. I think there's some truth in that, and the important answer there is when there's interference of this kind, it actually gives you a right to have some measure of control over the system that's influencing you. So we think of that in the context of the state and governments. We all have an important say in how collective decisions are made. And I think we can also apply that framework to powerful technologies quite meaningfully. Many of these choices are here in front of us now. And I think more often than not, they're choices that are best made together. So sometimes people think, we can all just have our own personal AI reflecting our values. But really, these are global technologies, if you think about chatbots or algorithms. And it's often much better to have a common conversation where we try to figure out what the path ahead is. Of course, at this point, we encounter an important challenge, which is that people actually disagree quite profoundly about values, right? So they disagree about what a good life looks like. Some people are religious, some people are not religious. Even in the non-religious world, as you can see in politics, people really deeply disagree about what it means to live well together. And so that presents a problem for AI, right? If we want to come up with a common direction in which to steer the technology. So I want to ask, what can be done here? And I think there are some really important insights, many of which thankfully mesh with the ideas that are found in the secular version of Buddhist ethics and Buddhist ethics more widely. So I think the first kind of bridge we can try and build focuses on identifying pre-existing consensus. So we might ask, is there an overlap between these different value systems, even though they appear different? And there I would suggest the answer is yes, and it starts with the notion that human life is valuable, but it's also quite fragile. We can be harmed, and we all have a potential to flourish, right? So you might think as a base level principle, we want to include some notion of rights that AI systems must respect, that put these guardrails in place. But very quickly, we'll encounter new kinds of questions about AI that we're not well positioned to answer. For example, this question about AI and human relationships, and we will need to kind of evolve our discussion. So the second thing I would suggest is that we could have a democratic discourse or conversation or even vote on these things. And I believe Merve was gesturing in that direction when she spoke about community dialogues. And the idea here would ideally be that everyone affected by a decision would have an opportunity to express their opinion in their own voice. Because as I believe Emily M. Bender said earlier, everyone has expertise that's relevant here, and everyone has value beliefs that are relevant here. But of course, the challenge there is that it's very hard to have this conversation with 1 billion or 2 billion people, right? And it's unfortunately not possible to have conversations with everyone who's affected. So we can't converse with animals. And there's many people who are not even born, right? But they will all be affected by what humanity does with technology at this juncture. So the third proposed approach I'd like to discuss involves essentially using moral imagination to try and understand what a more universal, compassionate approach would look like. So one question we can ask ourselves about different kinds of artificial intelligence is, if you didn't know who you would be, whether you would be rich or poor, whether you would be, born in Southeast Asia or America, if you just kind of close your eyes and think a minute, is there anything that you would still like to choose for everyone, that doesn't seem to rest on any, specific attachment that you may have? And I think that actually quite a lot can be discovered from this vantage point. So the first thing I'd suggest is that we all need to take AI safety very seriously, right? No one benefits from a recklessly developed or deployed technology. And so safety is a really, really strong kind of common cause in this area. Moving beyond that, I think that we all have a huge collective interest in remaining in control of the technology and understanding how it works, right? So people are interested in autonomous systems, but no one wants really autonomous systems where they kind of take the agency away from us. And then moving beyond risk, I think there's also the question about how these benefits, if they arrive, are going to be shared. So, there's a lot of interest in using AI for scientific discovery. And there's also a potential to use it to perform a range of economically valuable tasks. But if you didn't know who you were or where you would be placed in the world, I think we would all have a common interest in ensuring a widespread benefit, right? And given the state of the world, the material inequality, it's a real challenge to kind of fulfill that promise of widely beneficial technology. But I think that this kind of reflection can give us a kind of North Star or an orientation with which to tackle some of these important questions. So my final slide essentially emphasizes this idea that we must continue to learn to live together as the technologies at our disposal become more complicated and potentially more powerful. And if we follow the reflections of a philosopher called Hans Jonas, who's a philosopher who I rate quite highly, he says that in this new age, our sense of responsibility must become more expansive. So he says we should try and act in ways that are compatible with the permanence of genuine human life and that are not destructive of the future possibility of such life. So we need to think about everyone affected, and we also need to think about the longer time horizon over which our actions will have consequences. And my belief is by using these kind of reflective modes of engagement, but also real world institutions, democratic discourses, we can actually become more wise, and we can make better decisions about the standards to which to hold technologies and technologists and our own governments when it comes to making decisions that affect all of us. And ultimately, the aspiration is to make wise choices throughout the process. So these are my reflections, and I'll be very happy to discuss them further with you. Thank you very much.